Hey everybody, this is the Tree.Church Bible Study, and my name is Chris Reed, and I am the Director of Biblical Education here at the Tree and your host for this podcast, and really excited for today's conversation. We got Hebrews chapter 12. We're going to be talking about endurance in our faith. We're going to be talking about discipline, and we're going to be talking about how Christ really does truly make our lives better. And we're going to be trying to define that in very practical ways for you today. Have a great conversation in store, so join us after this ad.
Don't do life and faith alone this year. We all need purposed relationships to help us grow, both spiritually and relationally. The Tree offers connect groups for this very reason, so don't hesitate. Make the choice today to visit the Tree.Church app to explore and sign up for a group at the Tree.
Well, hey everybody, welcome back to Tree.Church Bible Study. Today I am joined by Pastor Michael Giacomoni. How we doing today, Michael?
Doing good, man. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Hey, I heard when we're recording this that tomorrow's your birthday.
Yeah, tomorrow's my birthday.
And tomorrow's a big birthday, right?
Turning the big 3-0.
Awesome, man.
Yep.
Welcome. Well, I could say welcome to the ranks, except I'm out of those
So you're
ranks.
out of it now, right?
I am out of those
Yeah.
ranks. So you and Brandon.
Then you're still
I'm still, I'm still hovering
38?
at 38. I'm hovering in there, yeah.
Yeah.
When I met you, you were 32.
That's crazy.
You know, I was just saying, like, I'm not super intimidated to turn 30 because I know so many cool people in their 30s. Like, I remember when I met you, I thought that then. I was like, oh, I think, Brandon's 30. He's pretty cool.
Yeah.
32 years old.
I
Now you're old.
appreciate it.
About to join the 40-year-old club.
I'm hanging on.
Yeah.
I'm not looking forward to 40s.
You got a couple years yet.
Yeah.
And we're here with Pastor Brandon Leitnaker. How we doing today, Brandon?
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Good.
Me.
You're welcome.
All my personalities.
Multiple personalities are coming out here. And so this is your New Year's Bible study, so never know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Brand new year.
There
So,
you go.
all right. So let's get into the questions that we're going to start with today. So what is a unique personal rule that you have created for yourself? Like, I'm never going to get married, like I'll never have children. And then why is that a personal rule for you? Michael, let's start with you.
Sure. I have like a personal rule with myself that I obviously don't hold to it perfect, but it's still a rule that if I make like a deal with myself, to not break it.
Okay.
So if I don't commit to something, then then it's fine. But if I say I'm like waking up at this time,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
just do it. There's no excuses. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I would be rather embarrassed to like break commitments and deals with other people. And I think I should be even more embarrassed to do it with myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's like, everything from like a self-care perspective or just like you have enough self-respect to not want to break that with yourself. So if I make a decision, it's like, all right, if I'm waking up at this time, I'm working out at this time, I'm eating this thing, then I'm going to do it. Which is cool until you just stop making deals with yourself to avoid that.
Yeah, for sure.
Because then eventually, like, I'm not going to make a rule. I'm not going to make a decision that way. I don't have to break it later. But traditionally, yeah, if I'm very much imperfect, but that's my goal. That's a personal rule. If I said it, if I say I'm going to do it, if I make a deal with myself, I'm not going to break it.
Yeah. Mine, I don't know if it's more preferential or if it really is a rule that I've established in my brain, but I can do breakfast at breakfast. I can do breakfast at lunch.
Nice.
I can do breakfast at dinner, but I can't do lunch at breakfast or dinner at breakfast, if that makes sense.
So
I can't blend those. I don't know. I can do breakfast at any point in time. One of my favorite meals,
Sure.
of all. But for whatever reason, those foods just seem really unappealing to me.
Like what foods? Like what's a lunch food?
I don't know. Like
Like
I couldn't
a
do
club
salad. I couldn't do
sandwich?
salad or a sandwich. Yeah, I couldn't do sandwich at breakfast. Like it just.
Dude, could you imagine waking up and eating a salad? Like even if you love salad, that's
I know.
that'd be a
Yeah,
crazy
yeah.
morning decision.
So my brain and my wife gets after me because I tell the kids all the time, like, that's not a breakfast food. You can't eat that right now. And she's like,
All right.
let them eat what
it's
they
just
want.
food.
Time out. Time out. What about pizza?
Oh.
Or hot dogs?
I can't do it.
Like you couldn't eat
I could not do pizza at breakfast.
You don't do like a cold leftover piece of pizza
Not
for breakfast sometimes? You
no.
animal.
Man.
I know.
You're missing out. That's the life.
So I can't do it. I can't stomach it.
My dad literally will eat anything that's in the refrigerator at 3 o'clock in the morning when he gets up to go to work.
My man.
Like he cold pizza, cold
Gets up to
spaghetti.
go to work at 3 a.m.
Oh yeah,
That's
yeah,
a wild life.
yeah,
Ugh.
yeah.
My
He's
dad-
done it his entire life, my entire life, at least I know of.
My
so.
dad will do this thing where he takes like just whatever's left over in the fridge from the week on like a Saturday morning. So if there's whatever protein's left over and whatever starch is left over, could be anything. Could be pizza if there's nothing else. Could be Chipotle.
Cuts it up,
Throw it in the pan, throw it with some potatoes, throw it with like sausage or whatever, and just put it with some oil, make like a hash out of it. I've had some wild breakfasts that all kind of taste the same because it's seasoned the same, but I've had some wild things in there.
That's funny.
You can sneak a lot of stuff into a good breakfast hash, but yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to think about this, and I don't know. I think my personal rule is that, like, I never want to be a bother to anybody. Mm-hmm. So, like, mine is, like, I will go out of my way to not be a hindrance or a bother to other people. So, like, I'm known as a compulsive, like, sorry, hey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Compulsive apologizer.
Yeah, I'm a compulsive apologizer. You didn't know that could be a thing, did you? So, but now you know.
You're just aggressively polite. I feel like I could spill soup in your lap and you'd be like, man, I'm really sorry.
I did something to contribute to that.
Yeah. And there's just this thing inside of me that just says, like, I will never be a bother to anybody. Like, I will never be there, like, a burden. I will never, I don't want to be, I don't want to be that. So, I think it comes from, I was pretty okay with being a mooch when I was a teenager. Like, I was okay with just kind of being lazy, being like, and I think I just have kind of created this thing in my head where I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore. Like, I will not be a hindrance on somebody.
Yeah,
so
that's super good.
I think that's the best way I can answer that for me. But what is something challenging that you would like to do in the next 5 years? Within the next 5 years. So, like, you don't, like, if you had I want to do this before the end of 5 years.
Yeah. I'm on like a journey with personal health right now. And that is like something where, speaking of like making rules with yourself, I just hit a point in my life where I was like, okay, like, if I believe, I mentioned self-respect earlier, where if I respect myself enough, I'm going to keep a deal with myself. I kind of got to that place with my physical, presence. It's like, all right, do I respect myself enough to want to live long enough and in a healthy way to be around for my kids and all this good stuff? So I've been in that process this last year. I would like to meet those goals with it, because it's more than just like, I want to lose X amount of weight. There's a lot of things I want to do from a physical perspective that sets myself up for long-term success. And I think to be able to look back in 5 years and say, I checked off the boxes, I did those things, I'm stewarding over what I can. There's things that are out of your control, but things that are in my control are in my control. I think that'd be pretty great.
So you have like a list of things as opposed to like one big thing that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. It started with like one big thing. Started with like lose 100 pounds. Like that was like the big thing that I started with. And then as you progress in that in that process, it exposes a bunch of other stuff too. Like, I should probably also focus on this. I should probably also focus on this. And all of a sudden one day, you know what I mean? So I ran a half marathon this year just out of like, because I wanted to see if I could, you know what I mean? It's like
that's awesome.
So that wasn't a part of the original plan. And I've got a bunch of stuff like that. Wouldn't it be cool one day? Like, I want to do Murph next year with a vest. Like, I just like have a list of like, it'd be cool to do,
Very cool. That's awesome, man.
For clarity, Murph is a CrossFit exercise or
Murph is a CrossFit exercise.
Yeah. It consists of 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 air squats, and you run a mile on the front and the back of that, and you do that all with a 20-pound weighted vest on.
Yeah. So for me, I've done that with no vest, and I did bands around my feet to do assisted pull-ups. So this next year, I want to be able to do it with no assisted pull-ups and actually rocking the 20-pound vest.
Yeah,
which would be crazy.
That's awesome.
But there's other things that go into like the incentive. Like, well, that means you really do have to hit weight loss goals as well, because you're able to put on 20 pounds back. Like, pull-ups become really complicated if you're still pretty heavy. So anyways,
That's awesome, man.
Awesome. Yeah. Mine is, I don't know if it's selfish or not, but physical. I've always wanted to do, and I want to do it with Pastor Skip at some point in time, a swim run. So it's a little bit different, unique versus a triathlon.
You're tied together, aren't you?
Yeah, you are tethered together only on the swim. So not on the run and the run portion, but it's essentially like you do a trail run and then you swim a certain amount of distance. You do a trail run, just swim a certain amount of distance, and I just think the uniqueness of that experience would be a ton of fun. So
what do you mean tied together? How does that work?
So you're tethered together on the swim. So there's like a rubber band attached to your foot and to like the waist of your partner. And so
how long is the rubber band?
I mean, long enough to keep you guys
probably like 6 feet, something like that.
Okay. Yeah. In my head, I was thinking like your bodies are touching. I'm
no,
like,
no,
you're gonna drown.
We're not side by
Yeah,
side.
terrible idea, dude. Okay, that makes more sense.
So at some point in time, you're helping or assisting them in the kind of the flow of supporting
that's pretty
them.
Cool.
Yeah. So I'd like to try that at some point.
That's insane.
That's awesome.
I'd like to try that. Yeah.
That's sweet. So like the trail running side of that is like super appealing to me. Jumping in a cold lake, not so much.
Pass.
Yeah, hard pass. For me, I would love to accomplish a 50K. So I had that in my sights last year, and I was about I was probably 2/3 of the way there and had some health complications and had to kind of derail that goal. Would love to get back on it, but before that, within the next 5 years, I hope to have finished my master's. So that's kind of
Very cool.
my two big things. Like
Yeah.
I'd love to run a 50K.
How many miles is a 50K, Chris?
31.2.
I knew that. Just
something.
for anyone listening, you
Okay.
didn't know that.
And
Yeah,
you've done
so-
it within 24 hours, but you just haven't done it consecutively, right?
Right. Yeah. So like Brandon and I last January did it where we ran, I think so every hour on the hour we would go out and we would run either 2 miles or 1 mile.
Yeah.
And so we accomplished 31 miles by doing that in one day.
Clarify, Chris accomplished it. I was 4 miles short. I had an
Yeah,
injury. So
still
that was a
awesome.
bummer.
Still an accomplishment.
Wow.
So, but yeah, we did that a few years back, and that was actually last January. And we also did it on the coldest day of January.
Right.
I think it was like 0 degrees outside that
Yeah, I
day.
remember getting pictures from you guys. You had icicles in your beards,
Yeah.
and that was
Yeah.
crazy, man.
Yeah, which we can do a whole podcast on what that was someday. But
I was sleeping.
so was Brandon during the last 4 miles.
I told you, yes.
That
Absolutely.
was so hard, like to go
Yes.
outside when it was dark. Yeah.
Nightmare.
Anyhow, but okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to bring up the.
No, you're fine.
Bring up your failures.
I didn't. I'm a terrible friend.
No, it leads right into the next one, so it's great.
So, second part. What is the most intense physical challenge that you have ever done, and what did you learn about yourself in the process?
Yeah,
Brandon?
mine was that 24-hour winter challenge. We had done it in July,
Yeah.
which I love the heat, so the heat wasn't a factor for me
Mm-hmm.
at that point in time in that season, and I loved it. It was such a good experience. So we were like, hey, let's try and do it in a colder season. So we chose the coldest day of the year to possibly do it on. And it was all that and more.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, we started out with doing the 2 miles to try and increase those mileage throughout the experience. And then we did a trail at some point in time. I think
Yep.
it was like mile 14. We're
And the
like,
ground was covered with ice.
it was freezing, yes.
Oh my god.
And the biggest challenge was getting up every single hour and going out and introducing yourself again to the cold. You
Well,
know,
yeah.
in normal runs you do it once. You know what I mean? So your body has time to kind of acclimate, but you have to do that over and over again. So that was
Sure.
the biggest mental challenge. And then I think mile 18, somewhere in there, I hadn't trained effectively, and so I started getting some pains in my knees and my hips. And so I pushed through to 28, and then I just
Yeah.
eventually told Chris, like, the pain is too intense. I can't even walk. And that's rare for me to be able to quit on those types of things. But yeah, it was hurting pretty bad.
Yeah, to be clear, Brandon didn't not do it. Brandon couldn't do it any
Yeah,
longer.
yeah.
So like he didn't
Dang.
quit because he wanted to or anything like that. But
Yeah. And what I learned about myself was that there is a mental weakness, a mental game that you have to play with yourself every time. You know what I mean? That talking yourself into something that's challenging is, I think, as the famous quote is that it's 80% mental. I really do think that is a
Yeah, I
thing
agree
that
with
you
that
can
too.
talk yourself out of it very quickly. And so I had to learn mental strength at a level that I had never had to before.
I'm gonna jump the ship here and
Sure.
ask you a personal question with it. Have you found that plays out? So like, I know we kind of like doing these challenging
Sure.
things and whatnot. Have you found that it plays out in your everyday life in other aspects as well? Like, have you found that learning that mental fortitude to do something that's difficult or hard, that it's playing out in your faith and in your parenting and your being a husband, those types of things?
Yeah, there's a dialogue. I know the rhythm now. I
Uh-huh.
know that process of what I'm going through, and when I get to a dark space, how to kind of push through that a little bit better. And I didn't have that before. I mean, I had done athletics and those types of things, but not to that level where you have to like convince yourself that this is going to be good.
Yeah.
And to know that when pain occurs, that there's going to be a blessing on the other side of that. But yeah, it was a process, and I know that game now. I know how to convince myself to push through. So
Yeah. Awesome. Michael, what about you, man?
Yeah. So running this year has been really interesting to where, like I mentioned, I've been trying to get healthy for like a year now. And it's been really cool. I mostly was doing weightlifting, like caloric deficit and CrossFit. So like I would do some kind of combination of those three things in different seasons, where it just honestly started of doing CrossFit like twice a week. And then eventually it went into doing it more often, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times a week. And then I started like dropping that and doing some weightlifting with it, working on diet stuff. And then we went to summer camp, and there was no gym anywhere. Like, there's no CrossFit gym, and I didn't have a car because we just bust down there. So, like, I didn't have a car. The nearest Planet Fitness was like 5 miles away. So I'm like, I could walk, but that's like a really long, you know, and I just didn't have the time like to get there and back. So I just started running, and I famously hated running. Like, I told people, like, I had done Murph, like scaled version at that point where you run 2 miles. It was like the hardest thing I'd ever done. I hate running. I still hate running. I don't like really enjoy running. Yeah, I ran 100 miles this year, and I still like hate running. But it was just out of it. I feel like I had momentum. I didn't want to lose it. So I need to do something. So I just started running on the beach that week. Then I just kept running after that. And I ran, ended on the day after Thanksgiving. I ran the half marathon. I think I'm just probably going to hang it up for the winter. But the hardest thing of all that was not even the half marathon. I ran 9 miles before that when I was really sick. I just had like this gnarly fever, and I had it for like 3 days, and I couldn't break it. So I just told Gina, I'm like, I'm going to go on a run, and I'm not turning around until it breaks, until I feel better, until it breaks. So I just ran. This is not good advice. Like, if you're dumb,
No.
This was a dumb idea. Because I'm just like, if I can drink enough green tea and water and just run, I think I can run away from being sick. But I went out and I ran, and it, right at like 4.5 miles, I felt like the fever broke, and I turned around, and I didn't realize, like, I still have to go back. So like at that point, the farthest I'd run was like 5 miles. So that was a pretty big jump. So I ran that 9 miles, and that was probably the hardest thing the last 2 miles. But just like my legs felt like concrete. Like, I felt like I wasn't ready for it, you know. But yeah, it was tough.
What did you learn in the process of that?
You know, I would say, like, Brandon's answer, like resilience is good. Like, if you mentally decide to do something, you can do it. Like, it's just like running is one of those things. Like, you can just do it. It's going to be awful, and your body's going to tell you no. You can just do it though. Outside of like an injury or something where your body like literally can't anymore. For the most part, if you're healthy, you can absolutely go do something if you just make yourself do it. It's just going to be terrible. So that resilience kind of carries on to other aspects of life, knowing like, whether it be at work, in my marriage, just understanding like this can be done. Like, if I'm disciplined enough, if I can just set my mind to it, if I can just put in the hard work, I can accomplish this goal. I just have to do it, you know, because once you experience it in one way, it's easy to see it in other ways. That's like the positive side. The negative I got from it is like, you need to be prepared to do stuff. I wasn't prepared to run that far that day, and it made me not want to run. You know, it was terrible. It wasn't a good experience. It made me feel like I wasn't sick anymore. I don't know that they're connected. It could have just been like good timing, but overdoing it, I think, can like be a demotivator, you know, where it makes you think like, well, that wasn't sustainable. So it just kind of demotivates you to ever do it again. So just be patient, prepare stuff, and go into it with the right mentality. And that is, I think, what makes it sustainable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and that really, that goes into what I was going to say was the lesson that I learned, and I'm going to jump on the bandwagon. One of the toughest challenges I ever did was the Columbus Marathon. It was my second marathon, but the reason it was difficult for me was because I didn't train. Like, I think the longest I'd done was 13 miles at that point. And so I just underprepared. I wore the wrong shoes, which you never want to wear, like an old pair of shoes, like when you're doing marathons. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just bad news. So like about mile 10, my feet started hurting. Mile 13, like, and if you don't know, like, Columbus Marathon is notoriously like, it just kind of, you never know, like, weather-wise. It's in the middle of October, so you could get the beautiful 50-degree day, 60-degree day, or you could get like high 40s, and that little bit of change changes everything. So
I believe it.
It was uniquely chilly that day, and I had sweat all the way up through mile 13. Hit mile, I think High Street is 13 through 15, and I was going up High Street, and that's also where the only like hill is in Columbus, and also the wind is blowing in your face the entire time that you're doing that portion of it. And I'm just going by, and I'm seeing people like the half marathoners finish their race and get wrapped up in these nice warm blankets. I'm going from like sweating to like chills to like my feet are killing me at this point.
Goodness.
Knowing that I still have a half of a race to do, and I wanted nothing more than just to go sit down on the curb and have them wrap me in one of those foil blankets.
Bro, that's the first thing I thought about when I did my half, was like, people, this is halfway for some people too.
Yeah.
Like, that's insane.
Yeah, and it like, so I went by the half marathon pull off, and I kept going. I was going up High Street, and I'm like, at any point in time I could walk off. And I never did. I finished it, and I hurt like crazy. And the lesson that I learned was that, like, sometimes the suffering that endure in things. Sometimes that's just part of it. And whether you train or not for a marathon, there's a level of suffering that's involved in it.
Yeah.
But sometimes the lack of discipline leading up to things can be a hindrance to what that experience is for you. You know what I mean?
Super
like, and
good.
so
Yeah.
if I had trained for that marathon, it's one of the flattest marathons that I know of, and can be run really well.
Yeah.
But if you don't train for something like that, like, it can hurt you. And so that's kind of the lesson that I learned from it.
Yeah, super good.
Last question, and then we'll get into the Bible study. And I hope you understand as an audience, like, these questions, they kind of do feed into the things we're going to talk about usually. So these are great questions for what we're going to be getting into today. But last question, what do you feel are the key components of someone's personality that allows them to endure tough challenges? Is it high pain tolerance, friendships, like, to keep you accountable, deep personal loss? Like, what are the things that really motivate somebody to do difficult things and endure hardships? Brandon?
I don't know. Like, I am fascinated by this mentality. Like, what drives somebody to climb up a mountain and to be suffering and to say, I'm going to continue to press through? Like, is it personal motivation? Sure, yeah. But what is the difference between a person pushing to the top and a person who quits a mile from the top? You know what I mean?
Crazy.
Like, what is the difference between that person, each of those individuals? And I've never been able to figure out the solution. And sometimes it is, friendships that motivates people. Like, I'm going to do this, so do this along with me, and we can do it together. Then we can collaborate on this. Sometimes it's I've lost a person in my life. I've had some extreme suffering. I've overcome a great challenge in my life. So I'm going to show that I can still do these things. But it's the mental side of it that fascinates me. Like, what is it that drives one individual to the next to be more successful than the next, or what we define as success? I mean, everybody has their own little victories, but I don't know the answer to this question. So I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's probably hard to pinpoint because I think it's probably different for everybody.
Yeah.
Like, I think about the things that motivate me are probably different than the things that motivate you guys. So, like, for me, I don't need, I need friendships to be socially successful. I do not need them to be, like, resilient. You know what I mean? Like, I had to get over the phase quickly when I started working out that I had to work out with people, because people can be, not in a bad way, schedules are tough. People are flaky. They might not have like the same commitment level that you do. So for them, they might be, if I'll be there, I'll be there. I had to get over that quickly to let what I do be contingent on the people around me. So, like, that's not something that's going to feed into me.
Sure.
I also had to, like, get over the idea that, like, I'm going to do it for my kids. You know what I mean? Like, that's part of it, but that's not the big one.
Right.
Like, at some point, I had to do hard things, challenging things, because I wanted to do them. And you know what I mean? And I wanted to celebrate my own mental fortitude and resilience. And I guess if I were to answer it with one thing, it'd probably be that, like, mental resilience, to be able to say that in spite of the situation around me, I'm exclusively in control of my actions. That's what I'm going to focus on. I can't control, like my weight, for example. I could be mad at my parents. Like, well, I had a bad diet growing up. Okay, congratulations. Like, I'm in control today, though, of my life. Like, what decisions am I going to make right now? And I can fill in the blank with any problem that I have. Like, you could say, well, I only didn't succeed at that job because my boss didn't equip me well. Sure. What do you have control over that?
Right.
Like, that might be true. Like, I'm not trying to disqualify that. Like, that mental resilience to say, what do I actually have control over? I'm going to focus really hard on that and ignore everything else. I think that can challenge and push people to do some really wild stuff. We both have read that Into Thin Air, that Jack Kerouac, not Jack Kerouac.
John
Krakauer or something.
Krakauer. Yes.
Where he just documented people climbing Everest, right?
Yeah.
And it was just like, people's ability to do that is unbelievable. And I don't understand it, right? And it's because I think there's a rush to that mental resilience of accomplishing something and saying, well, now I want to do the next thing. I want to prove to myself that I'm tough enough to do this, that I can get through this. And then all of a sudden, that's why I like working out in the morning. If somebody cuts me off, I'm not as angry now because I already did something really hard that day. It's like, well, everything else feels like small potatoes. You know what I mean? Like, this is no big deal because I've already done, X, Y, Z. And I think that provides a lot of, like, emotional fulfillment for people.
Sure. Yeah. I was going to say, just thinking through my own reasons for doing challenging things, there is a level of accomplishment, like, well, for lack of better terms, like, everybody's got a carrot that is in front of them that's causing them to pull along to pull the cart. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a reward on the other side of everything that we do. And I think we all find whatever it is that pushes us through those difficult things. Like, so like we may not have the same motivators, but the same desire to accomplish, the same desire to not be somebody or to be somebody, I think drives us to push through those things. Like, like it's I know for me, like there is a type of person that, and I don't have anybody in mind, but I'm just saying, like, there is a type of personality, a type of person that I don't want to be, and there's the type of person that I do want to be. And so like everything is pushed through that filter for me. So like I don't know that it's a personality trait. I think you can learn pain tolerance. I think you can learn how to depend on the friendships that have the accountability, like, and I think that plays a part in it. I think there can be like a way to make personal loss tangential, like, you know what I mean? Like, actually, you know what I mean? Like, I think that those things all kind of are like carrots that we keep before us. But like, I think in the end, we're all striving to identify who we are and who we aren't. And I think we're all trying to put those pieces together. And I think we're made to learn through suffering. We're made to learn through difficulty. We're made to, because without it, like, I mean, life's boring.
You stay put. You're stagnant.
There's like a rush to it too. Like there's like not an addiction, but there's a mental release when you accomplish something that you set your mind to. And like running is a really easy example of that, where you're running and it's like, whoa, I hit like mile 4 for the first time. It was like, that's crazy. Like I remember thinking like that was the craziest thing I've ever done. I'm like, holy cow. And then the immediate next thought is, I'll bet I can do 5.
I bet I can do it.
Like, there's like a weird, like, you know, and I just think we're designed to be accomplishing people. You know what I mean? I think even in the fall of man, where it's like your curse is to work. It's like there is dignity in labor and in work and accomplishing much through that work. And I just think like to neglect that, I think oftentimes leaves people anxious and sad, and like not like your body's not operating the way it's kind of designed to operate at that point. You know?
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah, great questions, guys. Okay, so we're probably about 40 minutes into this already. So no, this is a great start, and just bear with us. It's going to be a little bit longer podcast today because we are jumping into a phenomenal passage of scripture that really deals with the very things that we're talking about. We're talking about endurance. We're talking about discipline. We're going to be talking about the things that motivate us and kind of drive us to be faithful. And this is, at least I've found in my life, physical challenges, running marathons, doing half marathons, like doing run swims, all these things that cause us to be pushed physically are just really like metaphors, I think, for the real challenges that we face in our faith, in loving other people. And so like, I think it's a great segue to understanding how we can become more faithful in difficult times. So just a reminder, and this is going to be a real short recap. If you didn't watch last week's podcast, go back and watch it. We covered Hebrews chapter 11. It's the hall of faith, but it is this idea of like, because we've been surrounded by this cloud of witnesses, because we have all these examples of faith, we are to run the race set before us. We're the ones that, and I guess I'm getting into a lot of chapter 12 here, but where we are is based on faith. And so what the writer of Hebrews is calling us to is to continue in that faith, despite the difficulty, despite the trials. We are to be faithful people to Christ. So, and today we're coming to the kind of the ultimate expression of faith. So these Old Testament characters, they exemplified faith, but today we are looking at the one who we are to set our eyes on, the one that we're to look at, because he is the one who ultimately expresses what it means to live a life of faithfulness to God. And so we're going to pick up in chapter 1 or verse 1 of chapter 12. And then we'll just kind of start talking about this passage today. So
sounds good.
Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. All right, so Jesus, obviously, is the founder and perfecter of our faith. It's almost that Alpha and Omega, like that idea that he is the first of the faith and he is the one who perfected it. So what the writer of Hebrews is really doing is setting Jesus up as the prime example. So we set our eyes on Jesus when we are experiencing hardships and trials and look at how he handled them. And that word despising the shame, that's a unique way of saying what he says. It's not that he despised shame. He despised the shame of the cross. He didn't count that as something to keep him from going to the cross. So essentially you got Jesus who knew that the cross was going to be difficult, knew that the cross was going to be hard, and despite that, still went to the cross. So there's this level of endurance, this level of keeping to what God has called him to do. So he starts though by telling the audience, the listeners of this section of scripture, he's telling them his audience to throw off every weight, and sin gets tied in there. But what do you think the author means when he calls for them to throw off that weight?
Yeah, this is something that I can personally connect with really, really well. And I know there is portions of it that are sin, those things that cling to us. And I think I put down the Message version because I think it clearly illustrates some of those things that do get stuck to us at times. But he says, strip down, start running, never quit. No extra spiritual fat, no parasitic sins, just keeping your eyes fixed on Jesus. And that's how I can kind of relate it to. There's these potential weights that we add to ourselves at times, things that God never intended for us to have, whether it's views about ourselves that Christ never gave us, sometimes things that we take on, that God doesn't love us, that we aren't children of God, that my sin is so great that I'm never able to attain God. Like those aren't things that God has established for us, but those are things that we place around ourselves or place in ourselves, and that hinder our ability to run well and run with endurance at times. I think busyness is one of those things that oftentimes can be a weight in our lives that can hinder us from being able to connect with God and connect with the things that he has in store for us. The mentality of like keeping up with the Joneses, like that I have to look at everybody else and attain what they have, that covetousness of wanting what they want, wanting what they have, and that's going to distract me from really pursuing what God has for my life. And I think unhealthy relationships can also be a heavy weight in our lives, just that things that unnecessary, friendships that maybe keep us pulled away from God or pulling us not closer to God, but away from him. Maybe if we're single, relationships that are keeping us from attaining a healthy relationship, maybe in sexual ways and different ways like that. But all those things I think are just kind of examples that I've learned in my own life that are weights that I place on myself that are unnecessary and that I can throw off at times.
So the weight that he's talking about is obviously not just sin. Sin is part of it, like you mentioned. Do you think that, because I think where things get tricky for us is where good things become that weight. When things that we know that God gives to us, money, careers, success, like when those types of things become weight, how do we deal with that? Like, how do we navigate that there's this good thing that God gives us, and yet at times that could be the very thing that's keeping us and hindering us from pursuing Christ? Yeah,
super good. I think ironically, people might be surprised to hear that career is a really easy example for like a lot of pastors and ministers, because you think like, man, your job is to be close to God. Like, so how could that possibly be? The more you do your job, like the closer you are to God. And I think people would be shocked to know that like, no, it's just a job. Like ministry is a full-time job that it comes with a lot of labor and work. And that can at times pull you from a lot of things, including the presence of God. Yeah. Like the grind of task doing and of vision casting and creating and critiquing and breaking things down and building it back up and all this stuff. That is very easy to do very easy to fall into the trap of doing that without God, even for people in ministry.
Yeah.
I don't know like what people perceive like a pastor's day looks like, but if I wasn't in ministry, I'd probably assume it was a lot of prayer and reading the Bible. You know what I mean? But the reality is we all have jobs here and we work really hard here. And so for me, I had to get over this idea that like, because I was doing work for a church, that it was appropriate to spend less time with my family, that it was appropriate to let it impact my mental health the way that it, at times all jobs can. like whether it be, I'm sure everyone listening understands that feeling of like anxiety over work performance or just like, things about the amount of dedication into your craft or into your job can impact your mental health in a negative way. And I just think sometimes it's slippery in ministry because it is so deeply tied to God that you can kind of confuse the two. So for me, this great thing, which is the work of ministry, can at times even be an idol in my life of like preventing me from actually doing the things that I have to do. So this beautiful, great thing can at times be the opposite of that if it's not handled appropriately and in submission to God.
Yeah. And I think that the biggest thing, if you're listening to this and you're going like, well, how do I identify that? Like, are your eyes still set on Jesus?
Super good.
You know what I mean? Like, thinking about it, like, there's so many times, because I don't think that God, throwing it off sounds like we need to give it up. We need to let it go. Obviously, Pastor Michael, you just said that that at times ministry could trend towards an idol.
Yeah.
But God's not asking you to give ministry up right now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Definitely.
So how do we navigate and keep our eyes set on Jesus? And how do we throw off that weight without necessarily giving up?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the things. So my job, for example, serves a function to serve my church and to financially provide for my family. That's what my job is, right? The second I see a lot of negative attributes sneaking in, all of a sudden caring much of what people think about me. Oh, did that worship song hit just right? Did this piece of content, was that received well? And all of a sudden it impacts my mental health in a negative way. That's not God's desire for my heart. What that tells me is that I'm informed by the wrong things. I'm valuing the wrong things. We have like a policy here at our church that is if something's broken, there's likely a system that's broken behind it. So for me, if I'm looking at these red flags of like negative quality of life, things that I wouldn't consider holy behavior, things that wouldn't be filled with spiritual fruit, I might be angry, I might be anxious, who knows? It usually means there's a system problem. I'm not taking a Sabbath. I'm not doing my devotions like I should be. I'm not spending quality time with God. So for me, anytime I see those red flags, rather than just quitting my job, saying, what is the system behind this thing that's creating this tension? Because it's probably not the job inherent. Like sometimes there is challenge with your job and it's just an inherent part of it. But most of the time there's a problem and there's something in my life that I'm not handling the right way. And then if I can attack that rather than quitting, it makes everything better.
Yeah, so true. Yeah. And also for me, the gauge is that becoming the source with which I find fulfillment, which I find satisfaction, which I find my needs being met. And when I see that I'm seeking all of those other things in replacement of God, that's when I'm like, oh, that's an indicator for me that I need to make that behavior change, make that system change in order to now make God that once again in my life.
Yeah, and I think we have to be diligent in this because what I found for me is that anything, like, I mean, from the beautiful blessing of my wife and my family to like to my job, to like you guys said, to friendships, to really to anything that God has given to us that is a good thing for our lives, anything that we do, anything that we're part of, Satan has the ability to take and twist and pervert, and I mean that not in a sexual way, but in its truest sense, take and twist to create an idol out of, as opposed to be something that God intended it to be the gift that it was meant to be.
Yeah, I think marriage is a killer example of that, where like my marriage brings so much value to my life and submitting to my spouse and like her and like us growing and growing together and loving each other is wonderful. But the second that I find my value in her, it's now sin. The second that I prioritize her over God, it's no longer a blessing. It's now idolatry, which is like, that's where you see everything break down. You know, in my life, that's where things get really dark and complicated and twisted, and where sadly people all get a divorce that'll fix it. It's like, that's not the answer. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think if we do, the key to recognize it for me is like what you said. Like, if I'm more interested in all of the other things that surround my relationship with God than the relationship itself, that's typically when something's off for me.
Yeah, well said.
So, all right, let's keep moving on. Consider him who endured, him being Jesus, who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. So we get this picture. All right, we're looking at Jesus. We are pursuing to live out a sustained faith through the rest of our lives. So he wants us to stay faithful. And then he comes back to this idea that you're going to experience hardships. You're going to experience trials. God is going to discipline you, and you're going to be challenged, and you're going to be called to pursue, to continue on in your faith. And you're going to have to take steps of obedience and allow God to walk you through this process. Brandon, when it comes to discipline, and I think we can look at it two ways. We see two different. We see discipline as training and discipline as correction here.
Correct, yeah.
How has discipline? You're a college athlete, Michael. You were a college athlete. You're a musician. Mm-hmm. How has discipline as training played a role in your life?
Yeah, I feel like without discipline, I just go ballistic. No, I feel like in a lot of ways, if I don't have those guardrails in my life of God correcting me, of trusted friends correcting me, of God's word correcting me, like all of those things, then I just choose my own desires in those moments. And I live a life that's so reckless, that's so far from what God has designed for me and wants for me. I mean, he talks about holiness, like that whole concept. And years ago, we taught a message series in youth that talked about guardrails and the importance of those things. And I've used that as a reflection in my own life, that there's importance for having discipline in your lives. Michael mentioned systems, the idea of having systems and discipline in your life to keep you within the bounds of the life that you're aiming for, the life that you're pursuing, in all things. And so for me, that's how it's kind of played out, is if I don't have those systems or those disciplines or God correcting me or giving me indications that I'm off in some area, then I find myself just choosing desires that are unproductive and unhealthy in so many ways. And so I need those guardrails.
Sure. So discipline acts as guardrails for you.
Yeah.
And
in the same way of sports, you mentioned, college athlete. If I didn't have those things, it wouldn't allow me to be able to aim for, the thing that I am aiming for, getting better at that sport, whatever that is. So having those disciplines and systems points me in the direction that I want to go and keeps me in line with my goals and my aspirations.
Sure.
Yeah, super good.
Same thing for you, Michael. Like, how has discipline how does it play a role in your life as a musician, and what kind of, even just playing off of what Brandon said, making you achieve the goal that you're trying to create as a musician?
Yeah, super good. Yeah, in regards to like discipline in your training and and as you grow, there's a cliche that, like, Brandon, you kind of mentioned this earlier, but it's that like 80% of something is effort and like 20% talent. Or I can't reiterate enough that like musical ability, I think there's a misconception that like, oh, that person is so musical or they're so musically minded. The reality is most musicians that specifically most good musicians really fell in love with music and put an irresponsible amount of hours into that to become good musicians. So for me, if you listen to what I sounded like as a singer and as a guitarist when I was like even 18, 19, 20 years old, it's terrible. Like, I wasn't very good. And I just had people in my life who still encouraged me because they could tell I was like really passionate about it, but it wasn't good. And sadly, a lot of people at that point, they either give up or they live with a false sense of arrogance, thinking like, well, I'm a good musician, without ever actually growing or practicing or getting better. For me, I'm not an adequate musician now because I'm like naturally really gifted. It's because I've put an insane amount of effort into it. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Outliers, and that was his whole principle. Like, you want to be good at something, do it for 10,000 hours, then you can consider yourself a master at it. I'm not at that with music, but I'm like 3/4 of the way through those 10,000 hours. And I can attest that like that is why I get to do music in the capacity that I do. Songwriting is a really easy example of that, of people being like, well, I want to write music. And so they'll write a song and be like, well, I wrote this song. And they're like, can we play this at church? And I'll be like, no, like, that's not a good song. Write 50 more songs and maybe we can pick one of those to try you know, in church. And
Yeah.
you realize quickly that people want to write songs. They don't want to like be a songwriter and like actually
Absolutely.
invest in the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
So for me, that discipline is like, no, I need to keep going. Like I need to keep grinding. I need to keep studying. Like every month I'll get into a new genre of music and try to like play it on guitar, play it on piano, or play it on drums so I can stretch myself, you know. And then that process over a long period of time, that discipline of saying, it doesn't matter if I feel like songwriting right now. I have it on my calendar that in this time slot I'm going to write music. And even if the song I write in that hour block is awful, that's okay. Because you might write 10 songs to get one really good one, but that one really good one is worth that time and energy and effort that you put into it.
Well, do you think, like, I think our culture loves the myth of like the naturally gifted, the naturally talented.
It's so rare.
Yeah, and I think there is something to having the gifts and talents for music that way. But
yeah, some people like Justin Bieber was like that. I remember like when YouTube happened, that's how he got famous. He was like 12 and he could sing like an angel. That's so rare though, and that's not normal. Like most music, or the idea of going to American Idol and singing really well, now you're famous. Like that's not normal. Like most people, it's a decade of failure that finally led to a success, and that was through grinding and labor and discipline.
Well, why do you think we want the payoff without the work though? You know what I'm saying?
Because the work sucks.
It does. It does. And I think going back to Michael's point again, if you want to be perfected in something, it takes a ton more time and energy than you could ever imagine or think. And so I think it's not being willing to step into that. It's wanting
want to do it.
It's wanting the instant gratification without the work that comes with it. And I think we all fall victim to that mentality.
100%.
You know, we want to lose weight. We want to run this marathon. We want to be better in our relationship with Christ, which is all of our aspiration. But at the same time, there is work that's involved, and that instant gratification captures us too quickly.
Yeah, doesn't Paul say like I beat my body, like whether he meant that like metaphorically or whether he meant it literally, like the whole idea being just this that like there is a level of like difficulty and suffering that has to take place, and we talked about this earlier, like with the whole running thing, like there's just a level of it that makes us better as people. And it's not a glorified, like, because I think you can get in this headspace where we glorify suffering, where we glorify the like, oh, I endured, like I grit my teeth and got through this. But more so and particularly with our faith, it's a reality of like we have to come to terms with the fact that when God calls us to do something, it's not always going to be roses and rainbows. You know what I mean? We have to be ready and be prepared for the difficulties, the struggles, the fight against sin, the being obedient when it's not fun. It's like...
Yeah, and I think out of all of us, I probably have the most like intoxicating job to the outside perspective. Like people really like musicians, like from a cultural standpoint. They make idols out of rock stars and out of even in church world we get that. We've seen young people come through that they just really want to be a famous worship leader and they don't want to do the work behind it, you know. But we us three have seen that in young leaders, and it's like because people really love the idea of getting on stage and just like essentially having a superpower and like look what I can play on drums. Like that's pretty cool. But to get to that point, it's just like it is so much work, and in that work, the amount of times that someone's in that process of trying to develop those skills and grow, it's you in that 13th mile. How easy is it to just stop? Like the idea of just not I do it all the time. Like I fail at this all the time. Music's another great works for that too. I'll be trying to learn a really complicated guitar part and I'll just make it simpler. And I was like, that's good enough. You know what I mean? Because it's like that's the easy thing to do.
Yeah.
And which is cool, but you know what I didn't do that day, get better as a musician in the way that I could have. You know what I mean? And that's if you would have walked off at that 13th mile, you wouldn't have had the same mental, resilience, and you wouldn't be able to do it again the next time because you can get through it. So yeah, I don't know. Just like I think people are so intoxicated by that end result because it can look so cool and look so fulfilling, but just aren't quite equipped or even really want to do all the stuff that goes into it.
Yeah. And we haven't got into the specifics of what kind of discipline looks like yet, because we're gonna continue that on here in a second. But before we move on, we also get the idea of discipline as correction. We get the idea of discipline as like, and we think of it, and I would say that most of us think of it as like punishment, of like, hey, God is unhappy with me because I did this.
Sure.
So now he's punishing me for that. and I think we think of our parents because why? Because it's not fun when our parents discipline us, right?
Yeah.
They use that example here. But when we think about it as punishment, I think we lose the fact that we lose the love side of it that is really trying to be produced in our life. Why do you think it's important that God corrects us? Or let me ask it this way: how is it loving that God disciplines us and corrects us in our lives?
Yeah, I think the way that he starts with Christ and then builds off of that perspective is something that we always have to keep in mind, that our goal is always to be like Christ because he is the founder and the perfecter of our faith. He is the goal that we're trying to attain. And if God is trying to get all of us to attain that, he has to do things in our lives to help us grow in those ways. If it's financial struggles, maybe he's pointing us to get healthier in our finances. If it's relational struggles, maybe it's something that he's helping us to grow in, as we relate to others, those types of things. Sometimes there's, healing in a process that God has taken us through. He's making us have conversations with other people that we don't want to have because it exposes things about our hearts. All of those things are getting us to experience the goodness that God wants to experience, the things that Christ got to experience, and not only now, but also obviously into eternity. So discipline is required to enable us to be able to experience those things eventually.
Yeah, super good. Yeah, I think that God disciplines us first and foremost for his glory. Practically, the way that looks, though, is us getting healthier. Like, God has never disciplined me in my life, and it made me less healthy. It might make something less fun or like more challenging, but never less healthy. Like, that's when and that's what makes it loving. It's for our benefit and for our health. And so, like, I think about my kids, and I think about, this is like what I'm about to say, like, might shock people, but I promise it's done in love. But my oldest daughter, Darby's like 4 years old. And a common thing that I would tell her in our house is if she is being rude or pulling one of her sister's hair, is I'll just tell her, like, Darby, no one is going to like you if you act like that. Like, you will not have friends if you're mean. Like, people aren't going to want to be around you if you're rude and if you're pulling hair and if you're biting people. Like, no one is going to want to be around you. And I grew up in the 90s where it's like the parenting strategy of like, everybody's great all the time and we celebrate kids. I think that can be really damaging. So I was like I want to hit her with that dose of reality of like, there are real life consequences that will impact your life in a negative way if you act like that. Yeah. Your life will be worse. I love you enough that this process right now might not be your favorite. It might hurt your feelings. It might make you sad. I need you to know, though, that the consequences are way worse. And like, and I want to love you enough to tell you the truth that like, you are not going to be a social success if you're mean to people. You know what I mean? Yeah. So here's what this looks like, and here's how we can get through it. And that process isn't fun. And again, that's why people have an aversion to it. Nobody likes being disciplined because it's not fun, but man, it leads to health like every time if you handle it and if you actually take it and put it to action.
Yeah. I think of all the ways that I've been corrected in my life. And let me just say, like, I have the deepest aversion to to being corrected, probably because I don't like being a burden on people, and it feels like I've failed them and have been a burden. But also too, the fear that this comes with rejection. So like the fact that discipline in my life felt like it was going to lead to like a rejection of who I was, of who I am,
right.
and overcoming that and allowing it to be this healing, this place of love, this place of like, no, I want you to be better. So we're going to address some things that keep you from living that out. It has been such a learning process, but it's been a beneficial process. And we're going to get into some verses here. He's going to move back into this idea of discipline as training. But I think we have to remember that first and foremost, God shapes us and he challenges us and he trains us by going, this is good. This produces what I want to see in your life. I want you to continue in steadfast faith. This will produce faith in your life. This will not produce faith. This will be a hindrance to faith in your life.
Yeah, super good.
So let's pick up in verse 12. Therefore, lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. Strive for peace with everyone, and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it may become defiled, that no one is sexually immoral or unholy like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal. For you know that afterward, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no chance to repent, though he sought it with tears. Excuse me. So he concludes this section where he gives a lot of these very practical, like, here are ways that you can live this out. Here are ways that you can be disciplined and find what you're striving for, finding steadfast faith. And he gives this example at the end of these things that hinder and things that help the faith process. He gives the example of Esau, who, if you don't know the story, Esau is Jacob's brother. Jacob is renamed Israel, so he's the father of the 12 sons who would become the 12 tribes of Israel. Esau was the oldest brother, should have had the birthright, should have had the blessing from his dad, Isaac. And Jacob tricks him. Essentially, Esau comes in, and I don't know that Jacob even tricks him. So, like, the story is Esau's out hunting, and hunting is difficult at this time. He's hungry. He's not eaten. He comes back, and and Jacob is like playing Mr. Tempter over there, and he's making this stew, and Jacob's like, I'll give you a bowl of this for your birthright, to be the eldest, essentially, is what he's asking for. And Esau's like, yes, I will trade my discomfort in this moment for this immediate relief of this difficult thing. So Esau stands as this like ultimate expression of trading off what is good and right and true, what's ultimately good, for something immediate and something comfortable. How do we do that in our lives so often? And why is that such a temptation that affects us as well? It's not just something that Esau experienced, but something that all of us experience.
I don't know. No.
You've used that answer once today. You can't use it again.
This is a process that I'm in right now, trying to examine my own heart and why I turn to things, the easy things, why I turn to the quick pleasure things so often. And then so I'm trying to sort through it. I'm trying to figure it out. And honestly, in transparency, trying to determine why my heart is always driven towards, even as you were saying, Chris, like this level of comfort, this level of ease, and why I don't accept discipline. I know it's foolish to say that I would enjoy discipline, but sometimes I don't endure, or sometimes I don't do the self-control things on purpose because I want the immediate pleasure. I want the immediate desire that I have in that moment. And so it's just easy. I mean, in short, it's just the easy thing to do is to choose the quick, easy way out and not have to endure and stick through it. I don't know.
Now, do you think, and I'm going to ask this question with the implied answer of yes. So do you think that discipline as training, do you think that discipline as training can help us overcome that temptation?
Sure. Yeah. If we were to want more peace in our lives, we're going to have to endure things that create more peace in our lives, or at least allow God to work that in our lives. You know what I mean? To seek him, to trust in him, to put our faith in him, as we talked about in chapter 11, more and more often. So that portion of training to get to that level of peace needs to happen in order to experience the peace ultimately.
Yeah, super good.
Yeah. What is it? I think the kind of notoriously famous one is like, when I pray for patience, God gives me opportunities for patience, as opposed to just like, poof, there it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a Bible story I think about all the time. Like just the idea of not trading your inheritance for a bowl of soup. Because I was raised in a time and a generation where instant gratification is everywhere. So like smartphones happened when I was in college, and so if you wanted to watch like dirty stuff on your phone, you could in any moment, anywhere, where before it was like where there were a lot more hurdles to that process, right? If I wanted instant gratification sexually, I could have it any second of any day when I wanted it. That's an insane thought. That's only gotten more intense, like Amazon, like the fact that I could literally have same day delivery on something in my house. I don't have to leave my house, and I can that day have something dropped off to my house, where people don't want to wait for stuff. And it's just like I've heard it called like the microwavable nation, the idea of like, or air fryers. It's like, I want it now, I want it fast, I want it as efficiently as possible. I don't want to have to do the labor of things. And I found myself in life appreciating things that are more methodical and things that take more time. And I think it's because somewhere deep down, we desire things that take discipline because it's more enriching and it's more gratifying. And there's more like, there's so much more to be accomplished of things that actually take time and effort and energy.
Yeah.
But it is way too easy to just not.
Mm-hmm.
It's too fun to just not.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to be lazy in that and just to say, I don't want to. Like, there's a reason why people do like make that decision, because it's nice. Like,
Yeah.
convenience is great. Laziness is great. I'm so lazy. Like, I
don't think that's true.
I
but-
love doing nothing. Like,
Yeah.
I've had nights, like before I had kids, it's a little bit harder with kids, but I have nights where I'm like, oh man, this new video game came out. I want to play it. And that whole night I just watched like Vine. It's gone now. There's an app called Vine on my phone where I'm like, oh wow, I couldn't even get to the other lazy thing because I was so lazy in this lazy thing. You know what I mean? Because it actually takes time, energy, and effort, and it's nice to not to, but you miss out on the deep gratification and satisfaction of actually of doing the right thing and putting in the energy and effort to accomplish it.
So you've talked a little bit about like your kind of goals, and I realize like this, you have physical goals that you want in your life. You've talked a little bit about that. How has that changed the discipline of pursuing those goals? How has that changed that response though? Like, do you understand my question?
Yeah. It's because once you understand how good it feels. So like so if we're talking specifically about physicality, there's a really famous like joke where it's like nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. I remember like reading that online like 10 years ago and being like,
Not
wrong.
True. Yeah, not
Like,
true.
You just haven't had good enough food. Like, I promise that's stupid. But as cliche as it is, understanding like being on the other side, I'm certainly not on the other side. Like I said, I'm in a process and I'm literally halfway into this process, right? So I still have like a long way to go. But even being just halfway into this process of like all these goals that I want to hit, you do understand how deeply satisfying it is to accomplish a goal. Like when you say, I'm going to do this and you do it, oh my goodness. It's crazy for people who do CrossFit. It's CrossFit. When you finish like a really awful, we did one this morning that I hated. It was just like my hands hurt now, even now. And then like where you're done and your hands are bleeding, or you have like a callus tear and you're just sore and everything hurts. In that frustration and in that space is such a deep satisfaction that I have not been able to emulate anywhere else. Because what you're doing is everything else just gives you dopamine hits. Like on my phone, just dopamine. It could be pornography, dopamine. It could be alcohol, dopamine. It's a chemical your brain responds.
Sure.
There's something else called serotonin and a bunch of other chemicals in your brain that are naturally occurring that you don't need to do these stimulus things, when it comes to like the lazy things that feel better. Like it basically is the thing that dopamine is tricking your brain into thinking it's experiencing, where the reality is like deep satisfaction with yourself, where all of a sudden you don't feel as anxious and you feel more joy. That comes from accomplishing hard things. And I feel like, so for me, the answer is yes. Like once I have been in this process, like I said, it's not an addiction, but it's an understanding of, I know what it's like to be halfway up the mountain and actually push through and to get to the other side. I'm going to do that again and again because I know how rewarding it is and I know how powerful that is. And that applies like with marriage, with your spirituality, with your physical health. And so I see myself in my marriage of like, no, I do want to continue to have this argument, even though I want to leave right now. Like I do want to continue to have this challenging conversation, even though I'd rather tap out and be like, let's just hit reset. Let's talk about it some other time. Like I want to finish this conversation because I know that there's satisfaction on the other side of saying, no, we did the hard thing together and now we're better for it.
Yeah, I told you, Chris, this week that I'm starting to read through Job, and I'm fascinated by Job's experience, and I've been talking to you about it a little bit. But there's in chapter 21, he hints at this thought of why is the world having all these prosperities, and I'm sitting over here suffering. Essentially, that's in my terminology, my just like whatever how I'm processing it, but. In essence, he eventually ends with the greatest reward is not all of these things that these people are experiencing, but a relationship with God, a deeper relationship with God, and even focusing even into eternity. And I think we see our lives as long, 100 years is a long time, average being 80, that range. But truly, eternity is the reward, you know what I mean? And pressing through into life, being able to endure in life. And so it's keeping those types of things in perspective too, that as Job was pointing out, that these temporary things are just that. They're just temporary satisfaction, temporary pleasure. What you honestly want is a eternity spent in relationship with God and being able to be connected with him. So
what are the ways that we discipline ourselves that we can allow discipline to play a part to keep us on track? What are the practical things of faith? And with physicality, it's if we want to achieve the goal of accomplishing a race, like we have to get up on Monday and do this. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we have to get up and we have to run our miles on Monday, and then we have to run our miles on Tuesday, and then we have to rest well, and we have to eat well, and we have to follow this kind of plan. What are the things of faith that we can do to prepare ourselves and to set ourselves up for finding that endured faith, like that faith that results in what you just described?
Yeah, I think there's a myth that we can just attain something one time and then it be able to sustain us through to many, many days. And sometimes that works, but I think a daily moment by moment faith walk, we talked about this last week, is really the crucial key components that I'm finding in sustaining me through things. Like a moment by moment situation where I'm pursuing God, I'm seeking him, even the daily disciplines of being with him. One of the main disciplines that I'm learning that has benefited me is just listening more, being able to quiet my mind and heart to be able to know exactly what God's will for is my life and understanding that, and not just simply assuming that God wants me to do something, but actually confirming that I want to do something has been a powerful tool, and me making sure that I'm maintaining the things, the disciplines that God wants me to, so that I can grow in these areas and whatever it is that he wants to accomplish in me.
Yeah, super good. For me, it really comes down to like, it's like an equation where I want to educate myself and then execute and act on it. Like execute that education. So spiritually, I want to learn about the Lord, and then I want to act on what I just learned. And if I find myself in a rhythm where I'm learning about the Lord, if I'm reading his word, if I'm listening to dynamic, sermons or lectures, if I'm learning and I'm actually then operating in that and putting it into application in my life, it's just like, rinse, cycle, repeat. You can do that over and over and over again. And if you're disciplined enough in doing it, then you're going to find success.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, it's the age-old expression, wisdom is knowledge applied. Like, that's super true. Like you can have all the information. You can read your Bible every day. If you don't act on anything, if you don't actually let it impact your life, it doesn't matter. You're not going to grow. You're not going to become more disciplined. So for me, I have to have a daily conversation with myself to be disciplined enough to get in the Word, to understand the God that I serve better than to actually go put that into action and do that every single day.
Yeah, that's really good. I know that God has been challenging me this year. Like, I'm thinking through like all of the things that I want like next year, and how I desire to hunger for God more, how I desire to rely on God more, and really like what you said, to have that, like, I hear God say this and I want to respond this way. And what I recognize is there are certain places in my life that hinder that ability to hear from God. It hinders that ability to not settle back into the, like, I'm just comfortable. Like complacent is not the right word, but like I just choose comfortable more than I choose like faithful. And so like I notice that there are certain times that I lack that hunger for God, that I lack a desire to spend time with him. And so what I want to do in my life this year is create opportunities and challenge those comfort places, so that I can create more opportunity for God to speak, more opportunity to hear from God, more opportunity to connect with God, and kind of foster that. So like fasting is a thing that I'm gonna schedule and put on my like calendar this year. Like I want to, not because I want other people to know it because I have a shared calendar or whatnot, but I just want it in front of me, and I know that's a challenging thing for me. Yeah. And so like I want to experience God in that space. Silence and solitude's another one. Like I so love getting up and just going in my day. Like I want to get up, I want to get into like all the things I got to get accomplished, and I want to be able to come home and just kind of shut off and check out. Right. And so like being purposed about taking time in the morning to be silent and to listen to God. Because I can throw like a devotional into that whole mix of being busy and really not get anything out of it. So like, it's not even the study time, you know what I mean? It's more like, for me, like being quiet. Okay, God, this is what's on my heart. This is what's on my mind. What do you want to say to me about these things that I'm going through? And then I think the other thing for me is like being purposed to not just shut off at rest time. So like I take rest as escape. Sure. And you know what I mean? And so like, yes, there is moments and times that we need to just kind of shut off and disengage and escape. But what does rest really truly look like? So like, and I've talked to my wife, Cassie, about this. Like, what does it look like to have and celebrate a Sabbath dinner with friends with family, like something is a little more purposed to get my mind focused on what Sabbath and what rest really is, and like being focused on God in those moments. So trying to establish these certain disciplines in my life to create and to foster what I lack or where I'm deficient in my faith.
Absolutely,
like it is something that I'm trying to work out and focus on this year as I think about this.
Yeah, super good.
All right, well, let's finish off these verses, and we'll close with some good conversation. I think we have a way of saying like Jesus is better. We say these phrases, and I think that it's really good for us to identify what does that really mean. Like, why is Jesus better? And so I'm going to read these final verses, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about, because that's where the author goes. He reminds his people Jesus is the one. Jesus is the reason that you endure hardship, that you allow yourself to be disciplined, that you discipline yourselves and throw off all the weight so that you can find life with Jesus. So, for you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest, and the sound of a trumpet, and whose voice, whose words made the hearers beg that no further messages be spoken to them, for they could not endure the order that was given. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. So he's talking about Mount Sinai.
Right.
He's talking about the first time that God came down and met with his people, and it was a terrifying thing to them. So he says it is not that cloud and tempest. It's not that that's not what we're being invited into, and not what we're experiencing. And I lost my place here. Oh, so he goes in verse 22, but you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to the innumerable angels in festal gatherings, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. See that you do not refuse him who is speaking, for if they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will they escape if we reject him who warns from heaven. At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. This phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of things that are shaken, that is, things that have been made, in order that the things that cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and with awe, for our God is a consuming fire. And so he doesn't conclude by saying, like, there is this tempest on the mountain, and it is this, this is the judgment side, and this is the grace side. That's not what he says at all. He gives this picture that we are being invited to the thing that lasts. There are all of these different ways that God is going to sort, for lack of better terms, and find the genuine, the true, those who are faithful. And the reward that they are going to experience is not fear, but a lasting place in a relationship with God, like what you had mentioned earlier, Brandon. So like I said before, this all comes down to like essentially just saying that Jesus is the better covenant. Jesus presents the better. He's the heavenly, he's the true, he's the genuine, he's the real thing. We would say it, Jesus gives us a better life. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think back to even Jesus' teachings and his parables when he talks about the old and new being blended together. And I was focusing on this as I'm reading these scriptures, because I think it's such a powerful teaching to know that God doesn't want a blending of the old and new. He wants the new. He wants you to be redeemed. He wants you to be changed and transformed, because it is better, because the life that he offers is better. And I think that in so many times we do try and do that. We try and have a blending of both in our lives, and that creates so many challenges because it doesn't draw us closer towards everything that we've been talking about, towards growing in our relationship with Christ, towards experiencing more peace and all that comes. And so for me personally, redemption has been that process of recognizing that truth, that the new that God offers is so much better. It's so much greater, because it is the perfected life as Jesus perfected through his faith and through his ministry, the perfected life, the complete life that God truly wants to offer us. And so I'm trying to, wrestle with that truth and apply those things more often. But
Yeah. I think about what we said earlier about that, like battling through my own laziness leads to, while that is like hedonistic and feels fun and feels fulfilling, it doesn't actually make my life better, which actually doing the hard thing does. That's, I think, the way that Jesus makes our life better. We're like, yeah, no, it is really easy to sin. It is really easy just to say, no. Like, it takes discipline. I think one of the misconceptions is that oh, grace is free. Anyone can be a Christian. 100% true.
Mm-hmm.
It still costs something in the long run. And it's the fact of submission to Jesus looks different. Well, accepting that salvation is free, a lifestyle that honors Jesus, while it's better for us, is still challenging. So the better life of Jesus isn't necessarily the easier life, but it's the more fulfilling life. It's the good life. And to me, the more I experience that, the more I get a taste of that, the more I want that in every single situation in life. The more I can see it in the way that I parent, where it's easy to be really curt and really short. It's difficult to be patient, but to see the outcome of that patience is a reminder of, like, this is what that life with Jesus looks like. It's to see different ways in my life that the cheap way out, the fast way out would have felt nice in the moment, but there's deep satisfaction in actually serving Jesus and offering those things up to him. And honestly, more than anything is the eternal value of it. Understanding that, like, no, this is a flash in the pan of eternity. Like, like, I want Jesus forever. Like, I want the good life forever. And that also needs to be, taken into consideration.
Well, and I think that is I think that touches on both sides of it. And I think that's so good for us to remember that it is both, Jesus is healing and perfecting and shaping us now. Eternity is now in essence, but it's also this promise of, like, the thing that I think we fear the most is not getting to experience life. And then once we get to experience life, because that's what everybody's chasing, right? To have the good life, that we're going to lose it once we get it. And Jesus offers this opportunity to both have the most profound and beautiful, fulfilling life, purpose-filled life, and for that to last for eternity. Like, that is, I mean, that fulfills, I think, everything that our hearts would need and crave and want. You know what I mean? So there's the correction and the healing of all that is broken and lost. And then there's the promise that we'll get to experience that peace and that wholeness forever. Like, what better is that? You know what I mean? Like,
how do we ask for better than that?
Yeah, and I think we bite into a lot of the promises of this world and of culture and of Satan, because we think that it offers those things, even to the point where, like, I think it's difficult for us to live this out and to really grasp onto. And the reason we're talking about this, because I think it's hard for us to grasp on to the fact that Jesus' way is better. Because I think we still believe in our hearts, in our minds, that we can pull it off on our own, even though we intellectually know that one day we'll die, that one day, you know what I mean, that we're imperfect people, that we experience brokenness. And I think we just can't fathom what it would truly be like to live with God for eternity, to be made whole, to find peace, like that is unhindered. And I just, sometimes I wonder if we just can't grasp it because we're so saturated in the thought.
Yeah, and I love that we have Jesus as that example. And we talked about this the other day, that when Jesus came, it was very clear that he was sticking to what he was called to do.
Yeah.
He came to preach a message that was different. He came to heal. He came to die on a cross. And everything that he did in his life surrounded around those specific things. And he wasn't going to get derailed from that. And I think if we can grasp hold of that and look to Jesus as our perfecter and our founder of faith, that'll at least narrow that search for us in trying to attain so many other things outside of that faith is it. That is our whole purpose and why we're here.
Yeah, super good. So good. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your thoughts. I think so much good stuff here. And you guys are endurance athletes in my mind. So we talked a lot about it. So if you have any questions about how to run a marathon or how to train, these are your guys. You want to talk to them. But any other thoughts regarding what we talked about today? Any closing thoughts?
No, sir. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, no problem. Always love having you guys on the podcast. So, well, thank you so much for listening today. And we are super thankful that you engaged this podcast. Not just because it creates these ratings or helps us in any way, shape, or form. We truly do desire for you to grow in your understanding of the Word of God. We desire for you to put your faith into practice. And we do these things for the purpose of helping you in that process. So when you engage this and you're growing and you're learning, we are happy people. So we love being able to do this for you, and we love being able to partner with you in this journey. So if this is helpful for you, please share it with a friend, because we hope that it helps them. So otherwise, guys, this is I think it's going to be our in between Christmas and New Year's podcast. We hope you have a great New Year's, and we hope you enjoy. And we pray that the new year will bring new life, new discipline, and new hope in connecting with God in a new way this upcoming year. Love you. See you next week.